Alrighty, everyone. So I'm going to walk you through John Winthrop's A Model of Christian Charity, which is a text that everyone should read at some point in their life. It does not matter of religious beliefs. This is a text which basically sets forth a lot of the principles of what becomes our national government system. And it's really important because it sort of discusses the separation of church and state that we have as part of our national identity. So Winthrop, as you read, was a deeply religious man, and he was very different than John Smith, for example. When he came into the colonies, anytime there was a problem, he was very mild-mannered. He always worked to find a compromise rather than use a heavy hand. And you can kind of see that in the syntax that he chooses as an author here of this sermon. So this is a very famous sermon, primarily because of one line. And I'm going to get to that line in a minute. But the first part I had you read two parts. The first part really just lays out what his tenets of being a Christian look like. And at this time, these are British citizens, but deeply religious British citizens. Everyone has identities tied. Christianity and religion is tied together. I'm sorry, Christianity and civility is tied together. So he lays out these ideas of morality as the tenets of both, of the government and the religious life. So he says on page 167, second paragraph, he says there are two rules by which we walk to walk one towards another, which is justice and mercy. You must have those two things. So one is a legal issue and one is a moral issue. And he points out that there are two laws at work here, the laws of nature and the laws of grace. So the religious laws and the laws of survival, essentially. And he says those two things work together with the moral law. So morality, ethics, must be upheld in both. Even though they're separate, they're actually connected. And he says that all of this leads to this idea of within times of difficulty, which the Pilgrims are undergoing great difficulty at this time, starvation and Native American attacks and all different things. He says there's three things they have to do. The end of 168 where I had you stop, it says giving, lending, and forgiving. So you must be charitable, you must be gracious, and you must have patience and love your fellow man. Because really at this time, think about it, that's all they have. So all of this leads to the second part, which is where the very famous line is. So the second part, Winthrop basically lays out his map for what he thinks the colonies should look like. And he says, primarily, you must understand that this is community. So he says, on the first, for the persons, we are a company. Bottom line is, we are not for the one, we are for the many. And he repeats this several times down this page. He says, the public must always oversway the private respects. And he separates out this idea. He says, we must seek out a place of cohabitation and consortship under a due form of government, both civil and ecclesiastical. So you do not separate church and state at this point, but he is essentially separating the two theoretically. And he's saying we must have a civil government and we must have an ecclesiastical government. And under both must be these tenets of mercy and justice, and the good of the many over the good of the one or the few. So this really is the basis for what becomes our Constitution, as far as our understanding of the good of the many. And he says that we must do all this with brotherly love without dissimulation. So we must do this without fighting one another. That is the only way the colonies will survive. If you look at page 176, he leads to this idea of what the colonies are for. So he says this colony, this first colony, is designed because it is the will of God. So there's this idea of predestination, of things being preordained, and that God willed them to be here as a colony. And he says that when God gives a special commission, a commission to build this colony, you must obey. And he repeats this idea. He actually gives this really lovely metaphor of the shipwreck and how you avoid the shipwreck, which is to do justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with God. So all of this, he says, must be knit together in the work. For in this end we must be knit together in this work as one man. So if you think about our Pledge of Allegiance, we say one nation under God. That really can be traced back to this text, this idea. And if you move down, this idea of destiny or preordination here, it relates directly to what we eventually get to, which is the idea of manifest destiny, which we're going to get to much later. But this idea that we have this God-ordained right to this land and to expand on this land, despite whatever peoples may be there. And he says, on the bottom of 176 to 177, this is where the very famous line is. He says, He, God, shall make us a praise and glory that men shall say of succeeding plantations, the Lord made it like that of New England. For we must consider that we shall be as a city upon a hill. So if you've ever heard those lines, this is where it comes from. This is the idea of we are here as a beacon of hope. We are here as the beginning of something that will grow and manifest and become something great. So it's really fascinating to see the mentality of this, despite the incredible difficulties that the Pilgrims were experiencing at this time. So I wanted you guys to just read this text to get an understanding of that, and also to understand where this very, very famous line comes from, because it is used again by Jefferson much later. So I wanted you guys to understand that. If you have any questions about Winthrop, let me know. You have a writing assignment after this, which is based on this week's work. So you're going to choose Winthrop or Bradford. And you're going to do a little bit of work on their biography and kind of understand how the text that they wrote, which if you think about it, Bradford's text is very, very, very different than Winthrop's text in terms of tone and meaning. Anyways, you can read the instructions for that. If you have questions, let me know. Otherwise, good luck, and I hope you guys enjoyed reading these texts.